A father's fight for truth. A black father loses his 10-year-old daughter under mysterious circumstances. Not trusting the official version, he takes the desperate step of installing a hidden camera in her coffin, but what he sees on the tape shakes him to the core and changes his life forever. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet suburban street where Malcolm Reed lived with his 10-year-old daughter, Layla. The neighborhood was unremarkable, modest houses with white picket fences and neatly trimmed lawns. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved politely but never really saw each other. Malcolm often thought about that as he watched his daughter play outside. She was his everything, the joy that kept him standing after her mother walked out years ago. That morning had been like any other. Layla sat at the kitchen table, coloring with her markers while Malcolm fried eggs and sausage. She was working on a picture of the two of them. Father and daughter standing under a wide tree, holding hands. "Make sure you draw my muscles right," Malcolm teased, flexing his arm as he set her plate down. Layla giggled, holding up the half-finished sketch. "You're the strongest dad in the whole world," she said, grinning wide. Malcolm kissed the top of her head. "Don't forget it." It would be the last time he heard her laugh. By late afternoon, the playground buzzed with the energy of children. Layla had pleaded to go out, and Malcolm finally gave in. He planned to catch up on paperwork for the body shop where he worked, but he couldn't focus, his eyes kept flicking toward the clock. Then the phone rang, and he knew before answering that the voice on the other end would change his life. "Mr. Reed, this is Officer Taylor. We need you at Memorial Hospital immediately. It's about your daughter." Malcolm barely remembered the drive. The ER waiting room reeked of antiseptic and sorrow. When the doctor finally came out, her voice felt like glass shattering inside him. "We did all we could. Layla didn't make it. The official story claimed she'd fallen from a jungle gym and hit her head. An accident, they said. A tragedy." Malcolm couldn't hear past the hollow words. His world had shattered, leaving only silence and disbelief. The funeral came too quickly, too suddenly for him to process anything. People came. They hugged him. Said things that were supposed to help but didn't. Layla's tiny coffin, white with gold trim, looked absurdly small among the gray stones of the cemetery. It wasn't until the wake that Malcolm began noticing things that didn't sit right. Layla lay there, serene, her face too pale, almost doll-like. But there were bruises on her arms and legs. Bruises that didn't appear in the autopsy report. He remembered how the paramedics had avoided his questions, their glances shifting away like they were hiding something. At first, he blamed it on grief. Maybe he was just seeing things. But the unease didn't fade. Then came the funeral workers, whispering in the hall, joking about getting it over with, and not wasting time on people like them. People like them. He knew exactly what they meant. As he leaned over Layla's coffin one last time, something caught his eye. Her tiny hands, so still, had dirt beneath the fingernails. Fear seized him. He turned to his sister, Denise, who had flown in from Houston for the service. "She didn't have this dirt before," he whispered, voice cracking. "Why is there dirt under her nails?" Denise looked over her shoulder, then back at him. "You're exhausted," she said gently. "You've been through so much. Maybe it's time to let her rest." But Malcolm couldn't rest. He couldn't let it go. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the images in his head, the bruises, the dirt, the uneasy glances. He knew something was wrong. By morning, he had made his decision. At an electronics store, he bought a small hidden camera. The clerk gave him a strange look but didn't ask questions. Back home, Malcolm carefully opened the coffin's lining and placed the camera inside, angling it to capture everything. It felt wrong. Invasive. But he had to know. Later, when Denise stopped by, Malcolm told her what he'd done. "You put a camera in her coffin," she said, stunned. "Malcolm, this isn't healthy. You're falling apart." "What if I'm right?" he said, his voice raw. "What if something happened, and they didn't care enough to look into it because we're black? What if they just erased her story?" Denise's expression softened, but worry clouded her eyes. "And if you're wrong?" "Then I'm wrong," he said. "But at least I'll know I didn't walk away without trying." That night, Malcolm sat at his desk, watching the live feed from the coffin. The screen showed only shadows and stillness. Hours passed. Nothing happened. He nearly turned it off. But just past midnight, something flickered across the screen. A movement, barely visible. He leaned in, heart racing. There it was again. A shadow moving across the frame. Then, faintly, the sound of something scraping against wood. Malcolm's blood ran cold. He couldn't look away. Malcolm's blood turned to ice. He leaned so close to the monitor his breath fogged the screen. For a long moment, there was only silence, then another faint scraping sound, like nails brushing against wood. Then, stillness again. His hands trembled as he rewound the footage, watching it over and over. He turned the volume up, straining to hear. The scraping was faint, muffled, but real. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, Malcolm drove back to the cemetery. The caretaker, an older white man with nicotine-stained fingers, looked up from a cup of coffee when Malcolm approached. "I need to see the burial records," Malcolm said, trying to keep his voice calm. The man frowned. "You the father of that little girl from last week?" Malcolm nodded. "Look, I don't know what you're after, but everything was done by the book." "I want to see the security footage," Malcolm said. "If you have cameras near the graves." The man scoffed. "Cameras? You think we're some kind of high-tech operation? This is a cemetery, not Fort Knox." Malcolm left empty-handed but more unsettled than ever. If what he saw was real, and not some cruel trick of the mind, someone had tampered with Layla's coffin. Later that night, Denise returned to check on him. "You look awful," she said, walking in with takeout bags. "You've got to eat something." Malcolm waved her off, pointing to the screen. "I saw something. Movement. Sound. Scraping. Like someone was down there." Denise's face paled. "Malcolm," she said softly, "don't do this to yourself." "I'm not imagining this," he snapped, more forcefully than he meant to. She sat beside him as he replayed the footage again. This time, Denise saw it too, the flicker of a shadow, the soft, unmistakable scrape. "Oh my God," she whispered. The next morning, Malcolm contacted the police. At first, they dismissed him. A detective named Callahan, a stocky man with a tired face, listened with thinly veiled skepticism. "You're saying your daughter's coffin moved?" "I have video." Callahan sighed but agreed to view the footage. His face changed as he watched, eyes narrowing, then widening. This could be anything," he said. "Compression of the wood. Settling of the earth. You heard the scraping. You saw the shadow. It's not enough for an investigation." Malcolm stood. "Then I'll dig her up myself." That got their attention. Hours later, under quiet pressure from Malcolm and a local journalist he called, a young black woman named Amina Harris who'd covered police misconduct in the city, the authorities agreed to exhume the coffin under official supervision. A crowd gathered near the graveyard gates. The wind was sharp that morning. As the backhoe unearthed the grave, Malcolm's heart thudded in his chest like a drum. Finally, the white coffin was lifted from the soil. Everyone went silent. An officer opened it slowly. Gasps rang out. Layla's body had shifted. Her arms were no longer resting on her chest but bent upwards, fingers clawed. As if she'd tried to push against the lid. Dirt lined her fingernails. Her mouth was open. The screams came from Denise first. The coroner on site turned white. "This is impossible," he whispered. "She was declared dead." She was. Malcolm fell to his knees, shaking. Amina captured the moment on video, her hand trembling as she filmed. The story broke that evening. "Little girl buried alive," screamed the headlines. Outrage spread like wildfire. Further investigation revealed the attending paramedics had never checked for a pulse with proper equipment. The ER doctor was found to have falsified records, under pressure from administrators to clear bed space during an overflow crisis. Layla Reed had been buried alive. The hospital issued a statement filled with legal jargon and cold apologies. But it wasn't enough. Public fury surged through protests, hashtags, and demands for justice. Malcolm was at the center of it all. Not because he wanted fame, but because he had loved his daughter enough to question everything. Enough to keep looking when the world told him to stop. In the weeks that followed, 3 hospital staff were fired. One was charged with negligence. The funeral home came under investigation. The city promised new legislation to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. And yet, none of it could bring Layla back. Malcolm buried her again, this time, with dignity, truth, and the knowledge that the world had finally seen her. At the new grave, he stood alone, a bouquet of sunflowers in his hand, her favorite. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't get there in time. But they know now. The world knows." The wind blew gently through the trees, and for just a moment, he thought he heard her laughter. The days after the reburial blurred into one another, press conferences, interviews, lawyers, activists, and grieving mothers reaching out from across the country. Everyone had something to say, but all Malcolm wanted was silence. Not just silence. Peace. But peace was elusive when your child had been buried alive. He had trouble sleeping. Some nights he'd wake in a cold sweat, haunted by dreams of Layla clawing at the inside of the coffin, crying for him. Other nights, he sat in her room, surrounded by her drawings and toys, hoping to feel her presence. He even left the night light on, the little one shaped like a cloud she used to love. Denise stayed for a while. She helped manage the calls and media, fielded questions from the lawyer, and even arranged for a grief counselor. Malcolm went once. Never again. The counselor kept saying things like closure and healing, as if those were places you could reach, like addresses on a map. There was no map for this. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, written in shaky handwriting. "I know what happened to your daughter." Beneath it was a name, Elijah Rowe, and a burner phone number. Malcolm stared at it for a long time. He called that evening. The voice on the other end was ragged and hoarse. "You don't know me," Elijah said. "But I used to work at Memorial. Janitor. Night shift. I saw things. I've been scared to talk until now." "What things?" Malcolm asked, barely breathing. "They brought your little girl in, she wasn't dead." "Not fully. There was a call from upstairs. Some administrator, guy named Dr. Bell, told them to clear the room and wrap it up. They didn't even try to save her." Malcolm clenched his fist. "Why didn't you speak up?" "I'm a felon," Elijah said quietly. "On parole. I say something, I lose everything. But then I saw your story. What they did to her. I couldn't stay quiet anymore." The phone went silent. Then Elijah added, "They've done this before." The next day, Malcolm gave the recording to Amina Harris. She published a follow-up article. "Former hospital employee alleges pattern of negligence at Memorial, they've done this before." That line hit like lightning. More families came forward. An infant who died mysteriously during a night shift. An elderly man who was never given a second opinion. A woman declared brain dead who was breathing on her own when the family saw her. Malcolm became more than a grieving father, he became a symbol. A fighter. A man who stood in the fire and demanded answers. He testified before a state medical board, helped push Layla's law through the legislature, requiring mandatory multi-doctor confirmation of death, especially in minors, before a body can be released or buried. The hospital fought back with PR campaigns and expensive lawyers, but the pressure was too much. Dr. Bell resigned. 3 more staff members were arrested. The state health department launched a full-scale audit. Months passed. One cold autumn afternoon, Malcolm returned to the cemetery, now free of camera crews. Just him. Just Layla. He knelt beside her grave, brushing fallen leaves away from the stone. It now bore the words he had chosen carefully. Layla Reed. Beloved daughter. A light the darkness couldn't keep. I miss you every day, he whispered. But your voice is louder than it ever was. And they're listening now. He didn't hear her laughter this time. But he didn't need to. He stood slowly, hand lingering on the headstone, then turned and walked away, not with peace, not yet, but with purpose. And sometimes,